Tonight, when the sun goes down, something in your chest is going to tighten. You will not notice it. You will just feel it. A door left open. A hallway with the light switch too far away. A sound in another room. You will tell yourself you are being irrational. But the real answer is far stranger than irrational. Your fear of the dark is not a glitch. It is a message. And it has been running, unedited, for hundreds of thousands of years. Start with a simple question. Why does darkness feel dangerous when, statistically, most of what happens in the dark is nothing at all? You sleep in it every night. Your bedroom does not change shape when the lights go off. And yet, your pulse still climbs. Your ears still sharpen. Something ancient takes over the moment your eyes stop being useful. To understand why, you have to go back. Not centuries, not millennia, millions of years, to a version of your ancestors who did not sit at the top of the food chain. They were mid-sized primates on the African savanna, and at night they were prey. Lions hunt in low light. Leopards specialize in it. Hyenas and other predators are built with eyes that gather far more light than human eyes ever could. Your ancestors, by contrast, lost most of their night vision millions of years earlier, back when their own ancestors were small nocturnal mammals hiding from dinosaurs. Somewhere along the evolutionary road, primates shifted toward daytime living. Color vision improved. Night vision did not. So think about what that means. For a huge stretch of human evolutionary history, darkness was not neutral. It was the exact window of time when your ancestors were least equipped to detect a threat and most likely to become one. Every rustle in the grass at dusk could be nothing, or it could be the last sound you ever heard. Over enough generations, the individuals who treated darkness with caution passed on more of their genes than the individuals who did not. Fear, in this case, was not weakness. It was a filter. And you are the descendant of the ones who passed through it. This is where the science gets interesting. The psychologist G. Stanley Hall, one of the first researchers to systematically study human fears, ran surveys in the late 1800s asking children and adults what frightened them most. Darkness came up again and again, far more often than most concrete, nameable threats. Hall noted something important. Children were not usually afraid of a specific thing in the dark. They were afraid of the dark itself, of not knowing what was there. That distinction matters. Your brain does not need a monster to justify fear. Uncertainty alone is enough. And uncertainty is exactly what darkness manufactures, second by second. Here is the mechanism behind that. Your eyes rely on two kinds of light receptors. Cones handle color and detail, but they need strong light to function. Rods take over in low light, but they cannot detect color, and they are far less precise. The result is that in darkness, your visual system downgrades itself automatically. Edges blur. Colors vanish. Shapes lose their certainty. Your brain, faced with a flood of incomplete information, does something it always does when data is missing. It fills in the gaps, and it does not fill them in randomly. It fills them in with worst-case guesses, because a worst-case guess that turns out to be wrong costs you almost nothing. A best-case guess that turns out to be wrong can cost you your life. This idea has a name in evolutionary psychology. The researcher Randolph Nesse described it as the smoke detector principle. A smoke detector is designed to go off far more often than there is an actual fire, because the cost of a false alarm, a little noise, a little annoyance, is nothing compared to the cost of missing a real fire. Nesse argued that many human emotional responses work exactly the same way. Anxiety, disgust, and fear are tuned to overreact on purpose. They are not measuring the actual probability of danger. They are weighing the cost of being wrong. And nowhere is that tuning more obvious than in your response to darkness, where the cost of missing a real predator was, for most of your evolutionary history, unrecoverable. So when your heart rate rises in an unlit room, that is not malfunction. That is your nervous system running an ancient risk calculation, one built for a savanna that no longer exists, but that your biology has not been informed of. Think about what that calculation actually costs you today versus what it once cost your ancestors. If you misjudge a shadow in your hallway, you feel a jolt of adrenaline. Maybe you flip on a light, and 30 seconds later, you feel a little embarrassed. That is the entire downside. But if one of your ancestors misjudged a shadow on the savannah, and that shadow turned out to be a leopard crouched low in the grass, there was no second chance, no do-over, no lesson learned for next time. The asymmetry between those two outcomes is exactly why the fear response never bothered to calibrate itself down. Evolution does not reward accuracy for its own sake. It rewards whatever keeps you alive long enough to reproduce, even if that means feeling afraid 1,000 times for every one time the fear was actually justified. There is a physical dimension to this too, one that goes beyond just the rods and cones in your eyes. Your pupils dilate in darkness to let in more light, but dilated pupils also reduce your depth perception and your ability to judge distance accurately. At the same time, your hearing becomes relatively more important because it is one of the few senses that works just as well in the dark as it does in daylight. Researchers studying sensory compensation have found that humans placed in low-light conditions show measurably heightened auditory attention, meaning your brain is not simply failing in the dark. It is actively reallocating resources, dialing down a sense it cannot trust, and dialing up one it can. That shift itself takes energy, and it takes time, and during that adjustment window, you are briefly exactly as vulnerable as your ancestors always were the moment the sun dropped below the horizon. Now here is the part that reframes everything. Darkness does not just change what you see, it changes who you become. In a study published in the journal Psychological Science, researchers led by Chenbo Zhang examined how dim lighting affects behavior, not just fear, but honesty and self-interest. Participants placed in dimly lit rooms were measurably more likely to cheat and act selfishly than participants in brightly lit rooms, even though nothing else about the situation had changed. The researchers proposed that darkness creates a psychological sense of anonymity. When you cannot be clearly seen, some part of you quietly assumes you cannot be clearly judged either. Consider what that means. Darkness is not only a hunting condition for predators outside you. It is a hunting condition for something inside you as well. A loosening of the social restraints that daylight and visibility normally keep tight. Put those two findings together, and you get a fuller picture of what night has always represented to the human mind. It is the time when other people's worst instincts have historically had the most room to operate, and it is the time when your own ability to detect danger has always been at its weakest. Two systems of risk, stacked directly on top of each other. No wonder the fear feels so total. There is a reason this shows up almost universally across cultures, even ones with no shared history. Nearly every human civilization has folklore about what comes out after dark. Spirits, demons, monsters, tricksters. Different names, different shapes, but the same underlying warning, repeated across continents that never once made contact with each other. That kind of pattern rarely appears by coincidence. It appears when a fear is old enough and useful enough that culture after culture independently invents a story to explain it. But here is the twist most people never consider. You do not actually need real monsters for the fear to work exactly as intended. The uncertainty itself was always the point. A parent telling a child to stay close after sunset did not need a specific predator in mind. The warning existed because for nearly the entire span of human history, darkness itself was the predictor. It did not matter what was out there tonight. What mattered was that you could not know, and not knowing was reason enough to be careful. Consider how efficiently that kind of warning spreads through a culture compared to a warning about one specific animal. A rule like avoid leopards only helps you in places where leopards exist. A rule like be careful after dark works everywhere, in every forest, every plain, every unfamiliar valley your ancestors ever migrated into as they spread out of Africa and across the rest of the world. Fear of the dark did not need to be taught fresh in every new environment. It traveled with the species itself, which is part of why it shows up in places that share no ancestry, no trade routes, no contact of any kind. The Norse feared what moved beyond the firelight. West African oral traditions warned of spirits that walked after dusk. Japanese folklore filled the night with yokai. None of these cultures compared notes. They arrived independently at the same conclusion, because the underlying biology writing the warning was the same in every one of them. Now bring this back to you, in your bed, in a house with locked doors, in a neighborhood that statistically holds almost none of the dangers your ancestors faced. Your brain has not been updated. It is still running the old software, still treating darkness as reduced information, still filling those gaps with the most cautious possible guess. That is why a coat hung over a chair can look, for 1/2 second, like a figure standing still. That is why a house feels different at 2 a.m. than it does at 2 p.m., even though the walls have not moved. This also explains something else, something you have probably felt but never quite named: the specific relief of turning on a light. It is not simply that you can see again. It is that your nervous system, built across millions of years to treat visibility as safety, finally gets confirmation that the gaps have been filled with something real instead of something imagined. Light does not just illuminate a room, it closes an ancient loop. None of this means you are irrational for feeling uneasy after dark. It means you are carrying a survival system so effective that it outlived the exact conditions that built it. Your ancestors, who ignored that tightening in the chest, who assumed silence meant safety, did not get the chance to raise the next generation. You are here because somewhere back along that line, someone listened to the fear instead of dismissing it. So tonight, when the sun goes down and something in your chest tightens again, you will not need to call it irrational anymore. You will know exactly what it is. It is not a malfunction. It is a memory, older than language, older than fire, quietly doing the only job it has ever had: